Okay, so let me explain this reprojection thing that I was talking about, and this is mostly for my own benefit so that when I go back to coding this, I'll know exactly what I'm doing, hopefully. So the situation at the moment is that say we have a world like this, where we basically have our player is here, this is their eye level. We know what height that is. We know that a ray has hit the screen there for the start and the end, and we're filling in essentially this space. Well, we're filling in that space in the world space. In the screen space, we have a screen somewhere here which is projected, and we know that it's between this height and this height. And so every time that we render a pixel here, we project a line from this onto this part here. And because we know where that line intersects with this field and we know the length of this field, we can draw a little triangle there with a right angle there. And so we know that if we then extend this out to the height of the ground, which we also know, then it's basically the same triangle. And so from that we can calculate, we know this height as well, call it h2. And so because we have h1 and we know that that is the distance, we can then immediately get this distance here, we'll call it d2 and d1, by basically saying that d1 is proportional to d2 as h1 is proportional to h2. That's easy, and that gives us our coordinate in this direction. However, with a sloped floor, this does not work, and here's why. So, same situation as before, but now what we have is a sloped ground. We have our player character height, say here, and actually no, I'll just pop him lower down for start. So if we're looking here, and we've got the screen here, at the moment we're just using the old screen projection, which used the height of this as our texture intersection plane. So if we do exactly the same thing here with the height of this and the height of this, and we basically get our ray there, we know this height, and we know this height, and therefore we can project using the same equation as before. But that's not where it intersects. It doesn't intersect here, it intersects here. This is the coordinate that we want, because it intersects with the plane here. To put that another way, if you were looking, get rid of all those lines, if you were looking, say, at this far pixel here, then you would actually be intersecting here. If, say, you were looking at this point here, your ray would come in on the screen, and it would be almost on the horizon, so you'd be looking miles away into the distance. And if it was trying to project it onto this floor here. Indeed, if you were looking anywhere above the horizon line, this is what I was explaining last night, if you were looking at, say, this pixel here, that is above the horizon line. And because it's above the horizon line, it can never figure out where on the ground that would be, because that's above the ground. What's going on? So none of that would work. What we instead need to do is think about it in terms of two intersecting lines. So we know the distance of our screen in pixel space, and we know the location of our scan line in pixels. And I'm going to make that bigger so it's a bit easier to explain. Say this is the screen. Right, so we're going to place our character here. Can I erase that? Yeah, I can. Right then. So, say we're looking, do a dotted line there, we are looking at this pixel here. Now from this, we know where the horizon line is, so we know what this angle is. And if we know what that angle is, then we also know what this angle is. Keep that in mind. We have the ground, which we have no screen space coordinates for it. What we do have is the world space. So we know this height here, and we know this height here, and we've already calculated what the distance to these 2 points is, so we have this distance here. So what that basically means is we can also calculate this angle here, or indeed this angle here if we want to. Now when you think about it, in order to figure out this point here, which is the actual texture coordinate that we want, we need to essentially extend this line back to where the player is, and then we have here the distance up to the height of the eye line of the player, and we have these two angles, and we know that they will intersect at some distance here. And it's that distance value that we're trying to get. And the way to do that is basically, as far as I can tell, turn these into not angles but gradients. Because if you can get that gradient and you can get that gradient and add them together, then what you essentially do is skew this entire triangle up like so. And if you skew the triangle up like that, then you've immediately got a single gradient, you've got one angle of the triangle, and therefore you know exactly what this length here will be. At which point it's just, if we have, say, if this angle here was 1 up for every 1 across, then you would know that it's a 1 for 1 and it's the same. If this angle was twice across for every 1 up, then to get that it would be twice as far out. So it's basically a very simple equation of dividing one by the other. It's just using the information that we've got to calculate what those are. And even though this angle here is in screen space and this angle here is in world space, because they're literally just gradients, they basically will still work. And then we normalize it back out into world space, and we've got our distance from this point. So we've got our distance, so that gives us a texture coordinate. And that's all we're really after. Now we just have to make it work. Stay in school, kids. They would tell you don't need maths. They're wrong, you do.